Next on KQED Newsroom, Governor Jerry Brown touting California's turnaround.
A budgetary surplus in the billions. In the billions.
And reactions from around the state as election season heats up. Alternatives for getting around town and commuting generating friction. And filmmaker Ken Burns on why we should all memorize the Gettysburg Address.
7 years ago,
our fathers brought forth on this continent
a new nation.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. In his State of the State speech this week, Governor Jerry Brown praised the huge budget surplus, but also expressed concern for California's long-term pension liabilities and the drought.
And we must follow the ancient advice recounted in the book of Genesis that Joseph gave to the Pharaoh. Put away your surplus during the years of great plenty, so you'll be ready for the lean years which are sure to follow.
One of Jerry Brown's critics is Neel Kashkari, a moderate Republican who entered the race for governor this week.
I'm running for governor because I want every kid in California to get a quality education, and I want every Californian to get a chance for a good-paying job. That's it.
And joining me now for analysis of the political landscape in California are Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer, Josh Richman, Bay Area News Group politics reporter, and Scott Detrow, KQED Sacramento bureau chief, joining us from the state capitol. Scott, we'll get to the content of the State of the State speech in just a moment, but first, some late-breaking news tonight on the issue of high-speed rail. The Brown administration took some action on that. What did they do?
Yeah, the administration has asked the state Supreme Court to step in and repeal two rulings issued late last year that really harmed high-speed rail. One of them blocked the project from accessing $8 billion in bond money, and the other one basically threw out the plan's financial plan and said you need to rewrite it. This is an interesting pivot because the authorities' message all along has been these rulings are not a problem. They're something that they can work around. These won't delay the project at all. But now the Brown administration has put forward this court ruling saying that those earlier rulings, quote, imperil the project. And of course, this comes a few weeks after Governor Brown has proposed diverting $250 million from California's cap and trade program to pay for the rail project. So I think this is an indication that the high-speed rail project really is in financial trouble in terms of accessing the money it needs to start paying the federal government later this year. And that's in addition to the political problems it's having. Polls show that a lot of Californians are now skeptical of this plan, and more Republicans are attacking it. Neel Kashkari, who announced a run for governor this week, has taken to calling it the crazy train.
Scott, is it possible that this sudden attempt by the Brown administration to expedite this legal process is because some of the opponents of the project have been using this lower court ruling as an excuse, essentially, to try to pull the plug immediately? I mean, there have been Republicans in the House who have floated bills in the past week or two to essentially deny any further federal funding to this. Are they trying to get this overturned in a way so that they can no longer be used as a talking point by people who want to pull the plug?
Right. I mean, I think that is a real dynamic. I haven't had a chance to read the entire ruling yet. It's about 50 pages. But you're right. There's more of a push coming from Washington to try and scale back that $3 billion that's already been given to the project. I think one date that we're going to see very quickly is later this year, late spring, the state has to give its first payment to the federal government to start matching those federal funds that have already been spent. And I think there's a real concern that they might not have the money to make that payment at that point. And if the state does miss a payment, the authority rather, I think that'll give a lot of ammunition to these Republican critics of the project.
I mean, Scott, don't you think one of the reasons that Governor Brown glossed over high-speed rail in that state address, barely mentioned it, along with a lot of other things we should say, fracking, the water tunnels. Jobs. He stuck to his message, and I think, fiscal responsibility, this guy knows enough to stay on message. He's been doing this speech longer than any other governor in the history of California, but isn't that one of the reasons?
Well, he knows how to stay on message, definitely. And what has the reaction been to his State of the State speech address? Because no concrete new proposals or plans came out of it.
I think that a few days after the speech, that is kind of the main point that you're hearing from both Republicans and Democrats. The main message of Brown's speech was that, you know, the state has a surplus now. It's better than it was when he came into office, but let's not go crazy. Let's use that money to pay down long-term debt and set aside for a rainy day fund. That was basically the only new proposal in the speech. The rest of it was devoted to kind of recapping previous accomplishments. And there was a lot of criticism from liberal lawmakers like Senator Holly Mitchell of Southern California, for instance. She said she would have liked to hear a lot more about poverty, a lot more about restoring California's social safety net programs. And that's actually something a lot of Republicans said as well. They also would have wanted to hear Brown defend this high-speed rail project, which he's been a big advocate of before. But you're right, only gave a very glancing mention to in the speech this week.
You know, I think in a lot of ways his speech was as much a campaign rollout as anything else. He gave us his campaign message for 2014, even though he hasn't actually declared. Experience counts. Continuity matters. He even handed out cards with his dog, Sutter Brown, on them with that fiscal responsibility message. A huge hit. That was the first campaign literature.
Yeah, well, the dog has always had a good job approval rating, so that's a surefire winner. But I thought it was kind of interesting, you know, in that it didn't get into details, things like the unfunded pension liabilities in terms of the fact that our state still has a very high unemployment rate compared to other states, the highest poverty rate. These are talking points that obviously people like Neel Kashkari, who's challenging him, want him to talk about because they're somewhat to his detriment. Kashkari, for instance, is making the case that, you know, oh, it's great that we don't have budget deficits anymore, but it's kind of like balancing our checkbook when you have no hope of paying the mortgage on the house. Whereas Jerry Brown would probably counter, yes, but the house was on fire when I got here and I put it out. So how about
exactly
that?
Right.
You know,
that's exactly right. That was his message. I mean, they talk about Jerry Brown likes to paddle to the right, paddle to the left. This speech was, I'm going to take it right down the middle. And he knew exactly what he was doing. Why hand ammunition to everyone else out there? Let's just stay on message.
And Kashkari's ammunition, or he tried to fire some ammunition, was that Brown didn't address the poverty issue.
I think it's so interesting that a Republican is the one bringing up, why didn't you say anything about poverty? The governor did say something. Scott, I want to hear your thoughts on that. But I mean, the fact is, the Republicans in the chamber there seemed pretty much happy with it. I think Connie Conway said, I love to hear Jerry Brown channel his inner Republican. That's the kind of thing. The criticism seemed to be coming more from the Democrats. Like, why didn't we talk about universal preschool for all and returning money to the mental health programs that have been cut? That's the challenge for Jerry Brown.
Well, let's talk a little more about the upcoming gubernatorial election. I mean, we've thrown out Neel Kashkari's name several times now. What do we know about him? Former Treasury Department official,
that's
Mr.
Right.
Bailout.
This was the guy who's 40 years old, by the way, and really was a Wall Street wunderkind. The guy who managed the Troubled Assets Relief Program, was known as the $700 billion man on Wall Street, but has no political experience as he runs for governor in California. He admits voting for Barack Obama, which in most GOP circles makes him a non-entity right away, but he's also pro-choice, pro-gay marriage. A lot of people have said this is a new sort of conservatarian Republican, a libertarian but conservative on fiscal issues. He's really got to make the case. Most Californians don't know him. He's also got a problem. He hasn't voted a lot. We did an investigation this week. You know, almost half of the elections in which he was eligible.
I would merely insert that Mr. Kashkari would probably want to point out he only voted for Barack Obama once, only the first time.
And for many Republicans, that is enough.
And only because of the candidates' positions on the TAR program.
But seriously, what are his chances if Brown runs for a re-election? And the only other person Republican side, Assemblyman Tim Donnelly, who's also not well known, is the other challenger, Tea Party favorite there.
Yeah, and I think Scott, you know, up in Sacramento's point of view, I hear, you know, Donnelly has problems right within the chamber of the legislature. He's a very conservative guy, correct?
That's correct.
How's he viewed up there?
I think that one of the things Donnelly is known most for in the Assembly chamber is being the guy who has something to say on every single issue, on every single bill. They've jokingly turned off his microphone at times before, and that's basically his reputation. But on the other hand, you know, I've been with Donnelly going out to Tea Party groups, And his argument is that, you know, as we mentioned, Neel Kashkari is a pro-abortion rights, pro-gay marriage, a guy who voted for Barack Obama. That's not going to play too well with the limited but very enthusiastic, you know, grassroots wings of Republican voters out there. And I think the TARP background is going to be interesting for Kashkari because, you know, we've seen this with the candidates who have had to go and defend their votes for this program. Very unpopular program. The argument is, yeah, well, it helped us prevent a Great Depression. But the problem is it's hard to run on something that didn't happen. You know, I'm the guy who saved us from something that you have to think about kind of hypothetically. Yeah. It's a tough sell because nobody likes TARP. You can acknowledge that it did work, but nobody's, you know, applauding the fact that the government had to give all this money to the banks that caused the problem to begin with.
You know, let's also talk real quickly in the little time that we have left about the Khanna versus Mike Honda race in the South Bay. Closely watched congressional race throughout the country. Why is it so high profile?
I think this is because one of those races that's going to define perhaps generational shifts. I mean, you've got Khanna, who's in his 30s, running against a 7-term congressman who's widely liked in the South Bay.
Who's endorsed by President Obama.
Endorsed by Obama and all of the Democratic establishment. Khanna's picked up a lot of the Silicon Valley tech stars and a lot more money than Mike Honda. 3-to-1 cash advantage at this point. It's an Asian American battle. Khanna, the son of Indian immigrants, South Asian population, is the biggest. That is the only, I think, majority population congressional district in the country. So you've got and Mike Honda, of course, from an internment camp as a child. These are two very compelling stories, and this is a big battle, Democrat versus Democrat, top 2 primary.
And that's right. We've got the open primary.
That's right.
And it is becoming one of the most expensive Democratic primaries. So we'll watch that. Very interesting.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for being here. Carla Marinucci, Josh Richman, and Scott Detrow from Sacramento. Well, later in the program, the backlash against high-tech buses and alternative ride services. But first, it's only 2 minutes long and contains fewer than 300 words. But this moving speech marks a turning point in American history, the Gettysburg Address. Filmmaker Ken Burns' latest documentary follows a group of boys as they work to memorize the address. Scott Schaefer sat down earlier with Burns to talk about why a speech from the Civil War moved him to make a film. First, a clip from the documentary.
Okay, guys, let's please sit up straight in our chairs. Let's get ready to start morning meeting. Today, we are introducing a tradition here at Greenwood, studying and memorizing the Gettysburg Address. And in a lot of ways, it is a rite of passage.
This is one of the most famous speeches of all time. And this was like 200, 300 years ago. So even if he said it for like 2 minutes, it still means a lot.
407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Well, Ken Burns, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Your latest film weaves together the Gettysburg Address with the story of the school in Vermont where boys who have learning disabilities memorize and recite the Gettysburg Address. What was it about that school that you found so compelling?
I live across the river in Walpole, New Hampshire, and about 10 years ago they asked me to come and judge this contest that they have had every year of the 35 years that the school's been open, in which they asked these kids with learning differences, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADD, a whole alphabet soup of learning differences. And I was so moved. I mean, tears just ran down my streak. And I said, somebody should make a film of this. But I came back as often as I could to serve as a judge, just as a good neighbor, just got to know the boys. I'm the father of 4 daughters, so it was great to have a little bit of boy energy around, and fell in love with the school, what they were doing, fell in love with the idea that the Gettysburg Address could be so transformative, and then realized this is the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. I've now got to do it, and it is a heroic, triumphant story of, you know, we like to separate people and say these are kids with special needs. These are special kids with needs.
And what is it about the Gettysburg Address and their struggle with memorizing it, and then also the message of that address?
Yeah, well, this is the whole thing. First of all, it's not that long. which means as hard as it might be for you or me to memorize, it's that much harder for them, but it's just 2 minutes. It's extraordinarily well written. It's very complicated, and it has the word here in it 7 or 8 times, and Lincoln moves the word here around, so it's sort of like rearranging the furniture for a blind person. It's dangerous, and you can watch the kids struggling, as I struggle, as you would struggle if you committed to our request that everyone in the country memorize the Gettysburg Address and upload it to learntheaddress.org. It's also the most important speech ever given in American history, in which Lincoln talks about a new birth of freedom, which it is for these kids, so there's that connection. But this was him doubling down on the Declaration. This is the Declaration 2.0. This has been our operating system since then. We have no other operating system. He said, look, the guy who wrote the Declaration, all men are created equal, owned other human beings, implicitly. But now we really do mean it. And even though we've just experienced this terrible battle, the greatest battle ever fought on American soil, we can come out of this stronger and more unified. And it is that kind of metaphor of battle, of struggle, that also compels these boys across various learning differences to do it.
You are asking Americans, all Americans,
Yes.
to learn the address, and many have, all the former presidents and President Obama as well. You suggested this would be good for the country if everyone learned this.
You know,
why so?
We often do best as a country when we've got our oars in the water at the same time pulling in the same direction. And we don't do this now. We're based on our distinctions. We're red state or we're blue state. We're male or female. We're gay or straight. We're young or old. We're black or white. We're north or south, east or west. We always want to make a distinction about the other. But what if we realize that we share, and this is what public television does every day of its life, we remind people that we share so much in common. And it doesn't matter what your politics are. So we had Nancy Pelosi reading, and we also had Marco Rubio, and we had Bill O'Reilly, and we had Rachel Maddow, trying to point out there are some things that history is a table around which we still agree to cohere, and we don't memorize things anymore. My dad had hours upon hours of plays and poems and bawdy limericks on his hard drive. I've got an hour or so. My kids have less, and we need to go back to where some of these things, part of our canon, are important.
There was some controversy about Obama's reading because he didn't use the phrase "under God,"
well,
and that there's some important information, explanation about that.
Well, this just proves my previous point about how, preoccupied we are in got you. There are several versions, several drafts of it, and we asked the president to read the first draft, the Bliss version of it, which is incredibly different. It isn't just lacking that phrase. But what we've wanted to do, and other people have read the Bliss version and other versions, is begin to talk a little bit about text. We don't know precisely what he read, what he delivered that day. There was no stenographer, there was no tape recorder, and there was no newsreel camera. There was no C-SPAN there recording the event. And so what I wanted to talk about is that even the most famous words in all of American history, the greatest speech certainly, has complicated history to it.
As you say, there was no, of course, video of President Lincoln. Now there's video of everything.
Everything,
you know? How do you think that changes our understanding and interpretation of history?
Well, it's going to be different. We have less letters to go by. We have less words to go by. But we have now pictures, which are often, maybe they've been devalued because there's so many. They're maybe not worth 1,000 words, but maybe they're worth still 250. So pictures do things. You can think of Rodney King, the videotape, the Zapruder film in the Kennedy assassination, as we've been thinking about that. You know, it's interesting that human nature doesn't change. I mean, the Chicago Times said, the cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. That's the Chicago Times from Illinois, the home state of President Lincoln, responding to the Gettysburg Address, which we now think of as the greatest address.
Last question. I know that you've completed a film or a long series about the Roosevelts,
yes.
Eleanor, Franklin, Theodore. And I was just thinking, you know, California has its own sort of interesting family, the Brown family, Jerry and Pat. Is there any thought of doing anything on that?
Of course. If I were given 1,000 years to live, I wouldn't run out of topics in American history. But you think about the centrality of California and the history of the United States from the get-go, and particularly now as a kind of laboratory of experimentation, and you think about the way in which the Brown family has superimposed their own lives and struggles and paralleled the life and struggles of California, it would be a terrific film.
All right. Ken Burns, thanks so much for the address and your extraordinary body of work.
Thank you. Thank you.
New ways to get around town and get to work. In congestion-prone Bay Area, that sounds like a good idea, but some of these transportation alternatives are generating controversy. Double-decker shuttle buses run by Silicon Valley employers like Google and Yahoo have attracted the attention of regulators. The buses will soon start paying fees for each stop they make. And ride service companies like Lyft and Uber that allow non-professional drivers to pick up passengers are being scrutinized for their safety and insurance policies. Joining me tonight for analysis are Chuck Nevius, San Francisco Chronicle columnist, and John Brooks, KQED Newsfix reporter. Chuck, let's begin with you and the Google buses, generating a lot of headlines, even nationally. The MTA, San Francisco's Municipal Transportation Agency, approved a pilot program this week. What would it do exactly?
It's an 18-month program. That what's happened is that people are saying the Google buses are using these stops, the Muni stops, without any compensation. And they're blocking the Muni buses. It makes it slower. It's causing traffic jams. They have to compensate the city somehow. So the MTA said, "All right, we hear you. We're going to impose a $1 per stop fee for each time the bus stops," and that runs into some really serious money. Some of them make as many as 200 stops. So there was talk that some of these companies might pay as much as $100,000. However, the protesters say that's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. That doesn't do anything. As they point out, if you got caught for a parking fine, it'd be $271. So tell me $1 is worthwhile doing.
But fee-wise, the city really can't impose anything more than $1 a fee. That's regulated by the state.
That's the problem, is that the state regulates parking spots. All you can do is get cost reduction. So the amount of money that would cost to implement this plan is all you can collect. They determined that would be $1, therefore they can't go higher than that.
But is there a talk of some sort of proposition to try and impose a tax or a fee?
That's right. If there were to be a tax, we'd have to take it to the ballot box. And I imagine, with the amount of energy and emotion with this, it would not be a huge surprise that that would pass. But it has become just a lightning rod for the entire issue of gentrification, for housing, for the change in the city, and most of all for class.
Is it misplaced anger, though? You're not going to solve the affordable housing crisis by targeting these buses.
Well, I think it is misplaced. I don't think you can make the case that buses cause higher rents. But what I can say is that if you block one of those Google buses, the Chronicle and every news outlet goes out there and covers that, you've certainly gotten people's attention. And one of the things that happened just this last week was that Mayor Ed Lee, in his State of the City message, spent a lot of time on affordable housing, on stipulations and stipends for helping people buy homes and so forth. So the message has gotten through. I'm just not sure about the messenger.
And the buses they do cut down on greenhouse gases. There was a study that came out, a couple of UC Berkeley graduate students did it, and said if these buses weren't available, 48% of the riders they surveyed say they would drive alone to their jobs.
Right, and even 60% of them said that they would get rid of their cars, have gotten rid of their cars. Many of them live in a very dense urban area, just as many of us do. It's a terrific idea in that sense. Now, there's also a part of that study that said that 40% of those people would say that they would move elsewhere if they didn't have a Google bus to take them there. But the fact of the matter is there is no transportation from downtown San Francisco to Mountain View. There is no, I mean, there's a way to do it with the train, but you've got to take a bus to the train. There's no direct link, and that's what's the real problem.
And it is very complex, and the big high-tech companies have pretty much stayed silent on this. We will see what they plan to do about this. I'm sure more to come on this
count on that.
Yeah, in the next year or so. Another transportation issue generating headlines are these alternative ride services like Lyft, the pink mustache, what people recognize, Uber, Sidecar. John, you've been reporting a lot on the conflict between the taxi industry and these services. First of all, though, explain how they work.
Well, these ride service companies, they enable any car owner to actually become a little bit of an entrepreneur. They can become sort of a quasi-taxi through these apps, these phone-based apps. They can sign up through the service, and they can pick up passengers and take them around the city.
And what is the appeal? Are they just more convenient than taxis?
Well, I think the appeal is, and you will actually get people in the San Francisco taxi industry admitting this, the taxi industry has not done a great job of servicing the city. I mean, it's sort of a city that's notoriously hard to get a cab in, and these new firms have come in and kind of filled that gap, and they really have taken a significant amount of passengers away from traditional taxis, and they've also taken away drivers from taxis. A lot of cab drivers are now moving over to their own vehicles and kind of setting up shop for themselves.
And ironically, many of them, I did a column on this at one point, and one of the taxi drivers got in touch with me and said, "You've got to come out and ride around with me and so forth. I'll show you how difficult it is to be a cab driver." So I did. A week later, he called me and said, "Now I'm doing Uber too." He has a separate cell phone for Uber, so he takes his regular cab rides, but also does Uber. So as much as they talk about how damaging this is, they recognize which way the wind's blowing, and they're going to pick up on this.
But John, talk to us really quickly about the insurance issue, because these are basically private drivers using their private vehicles for a commercial purpose. Do they have commercial insurance? Are they insured at all?
Well, the ride service companies like Lyft and Sidecar, et cetera, they have a $1 million excess liability policy in effect that's supposed to kick in when the driver's private insurance leaves off. The only problem is that the insurance industry says that private insurance will never cover an accident if you were driving commercially. So what we're seeing in our reporting, we've talked to a lot of these drivers, and they don't want to come public with the fact that they actually are driving commercially, because they're afraid that their insurance companies will actually cancel their policies. And just recently, we've seen that's happened to a couple of people.
There's even a movement at one point where the cab drivers were posting photos of the people who were, so that the insurance companies could see them and say, it strictly says in your policy, you do not drive for hire with this insurance company.
And of course, the insurance issue becomes a very big question when accidents happen, and we've had a couple recently, including one on New Year's Eve that involved a fatality. So many more questions that remain unanswered.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Terrific.
And if you're wondering where Scott Schaefer is, he's on vacation tonight, but he'll be back with us next Friday with a look at some of the stories we'll be covering. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.